I'm Elaine Raybourn from Sandia National Laboratories. Well, my God, that's like my, I'm so used to saying that. I actually retired from Sandia about a few months ago, so it's very recent for me. And, you know, it's interesting because I always introduce myself with that slide, like I'm a social scientist and, you know, I'm that little fish in a school of fish that you kind of think is your fish, but it's not really your fish. But now, when I think about it, I started off in engineering in El Sección de Suelos in Panama. That's where I'm from. And by embedding myself in teams, I've gone through like a really amazing career at Sandia, and now I'm very excited to be named a graduate faculty scholar at the University of Central Florida, where I'll be working with graduate students and the computer science department. So I'm still in engineering. I'm still in the School of Engineering and Computer Science, so I don't know, full circle. But I'm excited to be here because, as you know, Todd suggested, I'm here today representing the Consortium for the Advancement of Scientific Software. And we got started because we were 5 seedling projects that were funded by the Department of Energy to think about the sustainability of software, of which HPSF is really an important component. And so today, as the title of my presentation would suggest, I want to focus on community-driven strategies for cross-project productivity. And to do that, I'm going to first run through why community-driven, and then we'll talk a little bit about the diffusion, decision, and adoption process, and what it means to cross projects and bring in new communities, and then finally a little bit of Q&A. And so if any of you were here last year at the HPSF conference, I gave a talk in the COCOS user track. And in that particular presentation, what I focused on mostly was team productivity. So how to have more productive teams, how to sustain software by leveraging liaisons in your network of your projects. And so a liaison in this particular case is a notion that has been adopted from different communities where you're really looking at key people in a particular ecosystem or network that are able to, they're part of different teams, and they're able to perform or function at a high level because they have a lot of knowledge that is cross-project, and they take that knowledge to other projects. And so that was the focus of the talk last year, and you can go and listen to this talk if you'd like to hear more about team productivity. So why am I focusing this year on community-driven productivity, and how is that different? Well, teams are generally very task-oriented, and they last for the duration of a project, whereas a community is it's formed out of a sense of belonging. It should last longer, and it's really about ongoing relationships and about how you can learn together, so mutual learning. And so because of that, it's really important to think about community-driven strategies with respect to HPSF, because this is a community of different projects and different domains, and also other communities, which I'll show you in a second. But a community-driven strategy is one that is important for projects in particular that cross different domain areas, because what we know is that we really want to approach the communities in a different way. And so everyone knows, we're here, so we know about the decentralization, collective wisdom that comes out of cross projects or communities. And if you'd like to read a really interesting report that just came out in February, Linux Foundation released this ROI for open source. You can take a look at that. And what I found interesting in the report was, well, one of the things was that the types of open source contribution that they have identified, of the 3, there are 2 that are of particular importance, I think, to those of us that are here. So the first one was code collaboration, which I discussed last year, and then this year is focusing on more of the community contribution. And so when we think about HPSF, I'd like you just to consider this is a little diagram that I put together to help us kind of frame the context. If you think about HPSF and the community, it's really about interconnected community support. And if you see, HPSF's at the center, it's at the nexus of all of these other different elements that, in a sense, are larger than HPSF. So let's talk about and think about for a second everything that HPSF is not, that which is not HPSF. And so if you think about your stakeholders, your contributors, your core developers, the Linux Foundation, industry, and your users, all of these elements have goals and objectives of which, HPSF might be part of, but they probably have goals and objectives that are much larger than that which is HPSF, right? And so all of these different communities are all based, though, on elements that HPSF certainly has: mutual learning, sustained relationships, a sense of belonging, and shared values. So, where am I really going with this? What I'm going to talk about is why we need to think about, in terms of building a community, being very strategic and purposeful. I mean, this is something that I don't think we can spend too much time talking about because it's actually really hard to do. And each of these communities has these contexts and stressors. We talked about these this morning in the Future of HPC panel. How, there are, in your communities, you're feeling the stressors of the desire for more AI. Where's HPC going? And so all of that is kind of really pushing on HPSF as an organization, as a community. So when does a productivity strategy need to be community driven? In this case, as I mentioned, a productivity strategy has to start with intentionality. You've got to be intentional about the way that, we engage with contributors and our core developers, stakeholders, users, and industry. And we can accelerate productivity when we really start to think about what is that common goal that each of us shares. And I would also argue that these goals change. So you won't always have the same common goal with the same community all the time. It's going to shift a little bit, so it does require a little bit of a sensibility to develop to kind of understand when that's happening. So as I mentioned earlier, each of the components of the community, and these are cross-project communities, they have their own goals, values, and objectives. And so if we look at the same image from the perspective of everything that's not HPSF, like I suggested, then you can see that for HPSF, if you want to grow the community, and if you want to start to involve, more components, then really you have to have a strategy that is going to pull in or make the HPSF story attractive to these other communities who are also experiencing these stressors, like AI, HPC, etc. Okay. So in order to do that, and I hope you're following my logic here, I'm kind of trying to tell the story of how do you start to pull in your message into another community? How do you approach a cross project? How do you start to really grow? Well, the way you actually would start is with a message, and there is a decision that has to be made. So before you can even get to the point where you're ready to take a message to a particular group or community, you have to first think about the vocabulary. Are you using the right terminology in order to really address that community the way that they will hear you? And so this means think about a shared vocabulary. And this also forms the basis of a mental model, in other words, of a common understanding of the world that you would share with that particular community. And so once you're able to do that, you can start to think about how you might capture the belief or the purpose that is important to that particular community. What would attract them to join HPSF? What's going to pull them in? And you can ask why. Ask people why they're motivated by certain things in order to kind of unpack this. And then we need to really think about a common goal. And by focusing on that, we need to consider what is it that really brings different people's needs together. What can we do to develop that single unifying message? In other words, you want to have a very clear way of addressing different communities. And so once you've thought of all of that, and you maybe even tested, your communication on smaller communities to see what the reaction could be, then you would use the process of diffusion. And so I'm a huge, huge fan of the diffusion of innovations, and probably because Ev Rogers was my major professor, and when I did my dissertation, and I've used this really in many different contexts, not just for developing communities, but also for team science. We used it in ECP. I mean, it's very, very actionable, which is one of the reasons why I really like it. But this idea of diffusing is about spreading ideas through an ecosystem. And so if you think about ideas, they are innovations. They don't have to necessarily be new either. It can be an incremental evolution of an idea, but the point is that when you talk about or think about positioning your idea across a particular system, you want to make sure that you are following certain steps. And so here, one of the other reasons why I like diffusion of innovations is because it also addresses the rate with which ideas spread throughout ecosystems or social systems. So remember we talked about that, decision process that the individual makes. So it's different for different people. That's part of the diffusion model. But usually people will start with wanting to have a little bit of an understanding of what it is that you are trying to talk about. So with respect to HPSF, it might be what are the different parts of your community that would be valuable for me. And in that decision process, usually people will go through these 5 different stages. Excuse me, it's not a stage. It's really 5 ways to think about what you have to satisfy. What are the criteria that need to be satisfied with respect to decision making? So usually people will adopt ideas or innovations when these 5 are present. The relative advantage is, first of all, is it better than what I'm doing right now, or is it easier? Is there something about this idea that is somehow advantageous to me? The compatibility is, does this fit with my worldview? Does it fit with what I'm currently doing now? How hard will it be? Do I need to change in order to adopt this idea? The third is complexity. Is it understandable? If it's too hard, too complex, then I'm less likely to really adopt this particular idea. Trialability is whether or not this can be tried out, tested. Is it something that someone else is already doing? Can I see how it performs? Can you demonstrate it? And then finally, observability is, am I seeing this already being used? Am I able to, is it visible? Is it something that is easy for me to see the benefits of? Okay, these are the different components that need to be present when someone makes a decision about adopting a new idea. And so when you're going into a new community, think about, what is it about your message that is going to help them solve, or not solve, but answer these questions that they'll have. So part of the diffusion process is also, thinking about the communication channels. And the communication channels in this particular sense are the different modalities, whether it's in person, face-to-face, if it's electronic, is it, asynchronous, synchronous. And I'm sorry, I can't go into too many details because of time. But one of the other things that is really important in this process is thinking about the different types of people with respect to the innovation and how it might also be adopted. So this is a really famous graphic. You've probably seen it before with the diffusion of innovations, that people have a tendency, different people for different products might adopt things differently. And so there are innovators, early adopters, early and late majority, and then laggards. And a lot of this has to do with their familiarity with the particular idea. But in adoption, the way that your liaisons can really help you is that if you already have liaisons that are task-oriented, they already have some relationships that they've established, helping them to become more community-driven and community-minded would be a great start to accelerate that productivity process, because they already know certain communities that they're engaging with. And so if we can just get them to broaden and think a little bit more about their communication, be intentional in a different way, I think it will go very far. The other thing is that an ecosystem has to have infrastructure, and especially stability, and that is what I believe the Linux Foundation provides for HPSF in particular, is that stability. And I think it's really great that HPSF can have that in order to be that neutral hub to attract others, to join the community. And then finally, when you motivate community champions in your community, they can assist you with adoption and diffusion. So every individual here, all of us, we all have other communities that we're part of. And we are part of HPSF, so really it's incumbent on every single one of us, not just the leads, not just the program managers, not just the Linux Foundation, to get out there and to propagate, the goodness of HPSF. And so finally, I hope I've saved a couple minutes for questions. Linux Foundation and HPSF are excellent resources, so I'm really hoping that you're taking advantage of them, not only by being here in person, but also just, throughout the year. And invest in your people. Collaboration and a sense of purpose, shared belonging, really drives connection, and it's those connections that drive this, the lasting relationships, the sense of belonging, the mutual learning, and the community. And we can all become cross-project, especially if we get out of our comfort zones just a little bit, maybe by attending another Linux Foundation conference. It might be adjacent to HPSF. It might be of interest to you, but it's not specifically the community. Go out there and see what they do and how they do things and bring those innovations back to HPSF. Again, think about establishing common interests, shared values, and focus on building relationships and shared learning. And finally, we want to make sure we reward community-minded people who are really skilled in building cross-project relationships. I'm very excited to actually be on the side now of university, and because I feel like I have an opportunity to really help the community in a way that I couldn't have before, bringing everything that I already know. So it's pretty exciting. So I hope that at a minimum, you're as excited as I am about this particular time of great change, and that we can together grow the community much larger. And so I'm happy to entertain any questions that you have, and come talk to me at the break as well. Thanks. Before, I forgot to also mention that HPSF is going to be at PASC, so come join us.
Thank you. That was an excellent talk.
Thank you.
So you had mentioned that you'd used some of this framework and ideas in the ECP. I was just wondering if there's something very memorable from applying this that surprised you, that, oh, this one thing worked really well, or is just something particularly you could pick out from that?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that question. So when we were part of ECP, those of us that were part of the ECP project, one of the messages that we really tried to instill in that organization was this idea of team of teams. And that we borrowed from retired General Stanley McChrystal. So basically we took an innovation from DoD, and we wanted to port that over to DOE. In doing so, we had to change the message, but retain elements of it that were exciting. One of the things that I was most excited about with that particular idea was that it was simple. So team of teams comes from the multi-team systems literature, of which, I could have gone into too, but that's very academic, and that's not going to appeal to everybody. But everybody understands team of teams. And so in the process of our, 7-year project, we worked hard as a small Tiger team to really get those ideas into the ways that we talked about ourselves. And when you hear leadership start to talk about your idea, so Doug Cothe started to talk about team of teams. And, I got it in writing, and he started to really, just be a proponent of it. And so when that happens, then you know that you've propagated your message throughout the system in a way that when others start talking about it and not just you.
Okay, I saw some other hands. Let's see.
Thanks for that question.
Thanks for the talk. So
Thanks.
Earlier you were talking about developing a shared vocabulary and kind of building a common message and a common goal. And then you said do a trial run of this and experiment with this and then see if it goes where it goes. Do you have any advice for doing this sort of thing? Because in our community building efforts, we've had difficulty with kind of identifying the success of the things that we're trying to share, basically.
Okay, so actually, if you really want to know what could work, you start really super small. So maybe hypothetically, let's say there are 3 of you that you want to put together a community-driven strategy. You're going into a new community. You're going to try to experiment with vocabulary. I would say each of you decide on the message that you want to experiment with. Each of you go out and start talking one-on-one to people very slowly. Come back and then share feedback with each other. What did you learn from that experience? Now, that's a very small, organically growing, type of approach. You could also do focus groups. We could talk later about lots of systematic ways that you could go about this that have been used by many communities to make sure that the messaging is on point. But probably the most important thing to remember is that the message may change. Remember, I mentioned that in the beginning, so don't get fixated on just one way to talk about it, but talk about that one idea. You can talk about it several ways, but make sure you're talking about that one idea. Yeah. Does that help? I'm happy to be more specific later. Yeah.
All right, we have plenty of time for questions, so do others have questions for Elaine? Anyone? Or I guess we have 1 minute.
60 seconds. That's
60
plenty
seconds,
of time.
actually. Okay.
I can yell.
Oh, no, it's okay. I think if you want to be on the recording.
Okay. I love the slide from the product group, Crossing the Chasm. Excellent book.
Oh, yeah.
I was wondering if you have any advice about identifying the psychographic group of innovators, because it's tough to qualify, and just wanted to hear your thoughts.
Okay, so since my talk is really from a communication perspective, the best way to identify that is to think about, or when people are talking, listen to how they talk about things. So an innovator is probably going to talk about something in a different way. They're going to say something like, I'm excited. So if you think about it, when I started my presentation, I said, I'm really excited. I ended it by saying, I'm excited. This is a time of really great change. In fact, we might even call it chaos. I thrive in the chaos. I love chaos. I left a really nice, comfortable position for chaos. So I'm probably most likely an innovator when you think about that, because of the way that I talk about a technology, a product, or just even the way that I go about my life. So if you listen to how people talk about things, you might be able to pick that up. That's the best suggestion that I have. It's one that I think will go furthest for you.
Thank you.
Okay, let's thank Elaine one more time.
Thank you.